You know, you really don't need all of the pens, or all of the notebooks, or all of the paints. Maybe just some of them. Maybe most, maybe all of them? Question mark? Hi everybody, today I want to give one of my little consumerism TED Talks to all of you. It's the beginning of the year, and I tend to have several videos like this throughout the year, but especially in January, because this is when we're all like, yay, new planner, new bullet journal, new, let's get all the new stuff. And then we're like, fuck, I spent all my money. What happened to my resolution about spending less money? This list can apply to any sort of planner or bullet journal or art related endeavor, but I will likely be speaking mostly from the perspective of bullet journaling in this video because, well, I'm only using a bullet journal as my planner this year, so that's kind of the mindset that I'm in. But what I'm going to talk about today is my essential supplies for bullet journaling and why you don't need to buy all of the shit when you start or when you're working on it. Now, when you're bullet journaling, all you really need is a notebook and a writing utensil, a notebook and a pen. It doesn't have to be the most perfect notebook. It doesn't have to have the most perfect paper. It doesn't even have to be dot grid, even though that's what most people use. You might like graph paper. You might like lined paper. You might want to use like just blank drawing type paper. You don't need to spend hella money. You could go to the store and pick up a composition notebook or a spiral bound, like one of those one subject notebooks that I have to buy 85 of every time my kids start school. You just need somewhere to write your shit down and something to write your shit down with. For many of us who are enthusiasts of the stationery genre, there are things that matter to each of us when it comes to what notebook and what pen. Like Cindy, you can't just expect me to use any pen now, could you? So I'll tell you what my favorites are currently. My original love for notebooks was the Scribbles That Matter notebook, but then they stopped making the paper that I love. There's a big like lust for really thick paper in the notebooks. Archer and Olive kind of started this trend. As far as I know, I could be wrong about that, but that's what I remember seeing. 160 GSM paper that's thick enough for you to be able to apply like some inks and paints to it and not have it do any bleed through, but that paper fucking feels like cardstock and I don't like that. What I want is for Scribbles That Matter to come out with 120 GSM paper or 100 GSM paper. So it's still nice paper, but it's not so thick that it feels like you are writing on a goddamn menu every time you write. I don't like that. I am currently super into the Baron Fig notebooks. Their paper is not quite as thick as 120 GSM, but it is thin enough for me to like it, but it still takes the marker and the pen that I put on it. I'm also using a bigger size, which is something that they have. But there is so many different notebooks out there. What I would suggest if you are new to bullet journaling is to just get a notebook and use that for a while, until you get the hang of bullet journaling and the hang of your style. If you decide you really want to apply like paints or shit to it, then yeah, you might want to gravitate towards one of those thick boys. But if you are like a pen only person, that might be wasted on you. Like for me, I want more pages, and the thicker the paper is, the less pages you're gonna have. When it comes to pens, again, there is so many pens to choose from. I'm gonna link up above my playlist of pen reviews. I have reviewed so many different pens, and I have done roundups of different types of pens like fine liners and gel pens. I prefer fine liners when I'm bullet journaling. I actually prefer fine liners in any sort of planner, but I've bounced back and forth. My current favorite fine liner to use for writing is a toss-up between the Pigma Micron in 02 or the Tombow Monoliner in 02. I also really love the Pentel Klena gel pen, which is a little bit pricier, but it's refillable and it's sexy as fuck. And that one I prefer in the 05 tip. Right now I'm kind of leaning towards a little bit finer of tips. There have been times where I really want a thick ass motherfucking tip and I want it to be just girthy and broad and cushiony because I have heavy handedness. I'm in small land. Like size does matter to me, but it doesn't mean that bigger is better. Now let's talk about some of the things that some people find crucial for bullet journaling and some people find useless for bullet journaling. And I tend to be in the useless camp, although as I've gotten a little bit more aesthetic, they've kind of come a little bit more into play, and that is rulers and pencils. I don't like penciling things in ahead of time. I like to freeball it because I always have. I used to work at Trader Joe's as a sign artist and would work on big chalkboards, and I would very rarely pencil in where my letters were gonna go. And I'd freeball it, and sometimes it came out great, and sometimes it was like pew, and you know, that's the price you pay when you're living the freeballer lifestyle. But yeah, I don't tend to use pencils or rulers very often. I like to do things the hard way, apparently. I would say that the more complicated your shit starts to get, the more you might want to have your hands on them to help you figure it out before you put the pen down and make the fuck up. I very, 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 very rarely, if ever, utilize a ruler for straight lines. If I'm going to use a ruler, it's going to be for measuring rather than straight lines. Reason being is that I tend to fuck up my lines a lot more when I use a ruler than when I just freehand it and pull my arm towards me. I don't care if my lines are a little bit wonky looking, but I've found with the ruler they tend to be hella wonky looking. And on that same note, having erasers and whiteout at your disposal, if you want to cover up mistakes, whiteout, white gel pens, they're good to have. I will say though that if you are going to pick up a ruler, my favorite ruler, I call this the greatest ruler in the entire world. I have two of them. I do have two of them. When I was working at Trader Joe's, we kept using the same one and it kept breaking because we'd used it so much, and we just kept the little like segments of it because it was still that great. This is a drafting ruler. You can get it from Michael's. They have it in the drafting section where they have all of like the protractors and shit. It's 18 inches by 2 inches. It's clear and it has a grid, so it's real easy to like lay it down and see exactly how well you have lined everything up. I may not always use a ruler, but when I do, I use the most interesting ruler in the world. Now, I mentioned that my favorite pen to write with currently is a fine liner, like I said, the Pigma Micron, and also the Tombow monoliner, but I think the Pigma Micron is like my number one crush right now. I would die for you. I would die for you. Fun fact, the only woman who has really caused me to question my sexuality is Shirley Manson. The fun thing about microns and other lines of fine liners, but for me microns currently, is that they come in a variety of sizes, and I really like having a variety to choose from when I'm working in my bullet journal because I like being able to have different line widths, different line like heavinesses, and you can create that by coloring over the same line a bunch of times, but that if you have a really fine tip fine liner, it's gonna fuck your tip up over time. They do sell packs of like 6 different tip sizes of microns, 3 different tip sizes of microns. It's a great place to start. I actually have gotten to a point where not only do I have all of like the standard tips you can buy in the bubble pack, I have like more specialized tips like the 1 graphic liner. I have, what did I just get from my art supply store? I got a 10 and a 12. Those are really thick boys, and I'm excited to try those out. I went to get some other stuff and I happened to see those and I was like, oh, fuck man. Remember I said don't go buy all the things? I bought all the things. Went to my local art supply store, so I was supporting local business. This is another one of those cases where I suggest to start small. If you want to start with fine liners, get the 3-pack that has like the 01, the 03, and the 05. Get used to using those different sizes before you venture into like 08 or the brush pens or whatever. You don't need all of the pens unless you know that you are using them. A lot of these pens can be bought open stock. So you go into like Michael's or wherever and they have a whole bunch of single pens and you can buy them individually once you know which ones you like. Here's a fun fact for all of you pen collectors. This applies to me and this is gonna apply to my next thing I'm gonna talk about, but pens dry out. They dry out over time whether you use them or not. You may find yourself with several drawers full of pens that are just withering away because you never take a second look at them, and then you open them and you think about all the money that you spent on these things that are just sitting there and it looks great because you have so many of them, but then you realize you're just hoarding pens and they're garbo now. Not that I know from personal experience. Speaking of collecting lots of pens, one of the things I have noticed with people in bullet journal world and something that I see questions about a lot in bullet journal groups is what markers should I get to have to do my bullet journaling with? Well, if you're going to use markers, if that's something you actually think you're going to use, then there are ways to get a lot of markers without spending a lot of money. And I swear there was a long time where I was like, super tips, fucking whatever. No, the Crayola super tips. Those are what you should get. If you're going to start with markers and you don't have a lot of money and you don't want to spend a lot, they're hella cheap. They are hella cheap. You can get the 100-pack of them for like 15 bucks or something, and you can get smaller packages for even less. They have a lot of colors. You can utilize them to fake brush lettering. You can use them as highlighters. You can use them as markers to color in things. They're really the best place to start, especially if you don't want to spend a shit ton of money and you want to just get to know whether you're going to use them or not. I have them, not because I started with them. I didn't start with them. Like I said, I was like, whatever, super tips. That's just more stuff to buy. But I bought them because you guys asked me to review them, and I use them from time to time. But I actually prefer my set of Tombow dual brush markers. But I have been using those for years and years for lettering, and I have the full set, and it's not cheap. If you're going to start with Tombows, my suggestion is to find a store that sells them open stock and select a few colors that are your favorites. That like look for colors that you gravitate towards because you'll use them all the time. If I was doing that now, if I was starting from scratch, I would probably pick a couple of different colors with a darker and a lighter shade, like a couple of pinks, a couple of greens, a couple of blues, a couple of purples, and then like 3 or 4 grays, and that would probably be what I started with. Or you can look at some of the coordinated 10 packs that they sell, curated bundles that have different kind of themes. You can find them on Tombo's website. They sell them at Michael's, and I would actually suggest, again, I keep pimping out Michael's. I'm not sponsored by them. That's just the craft supply store that's in my town, so that's what I have the experience with. They go on sale for like 40% off all the time. It's a great deal. You can spend $12 and get 10 Tombos in colors that you like if you find a pack that you like. You're gonna get highlighters. The super tips will work great for that. The standard highlighter I see most people using is the mild liners, and they work really well as markers too. Again, you can usually get those on sale from places like Michael's and Target, or you can find them online. You're gonna buy some markers, start with one kind. Don't buy Tombows, mild liners, and super tips. You can dupe all of the mild liner colors pretty much in the super tips. You can dupe most of the Tombow colors in the super tips. Just go with the super tips. Like, if you're trying to not spend that much money, buy the fucking cheap ones, see if you like them, use them for a while, and then maybe splurge on some nicer markers if you decide that's even necessary. But the last thing you want to do is go blow all your fucking wad on the internet and order a bunch of packages, and then have them all show up and not even remember what the hell is in them, and then open them all and realize you have 18 different shades of yellow and you don't even use yellow that often. Let's not have 50 shades of gray unless you know you're going to use 50 shades of gray. Washi tape. I just decluttered half of my washi tape. I have no room to talk. I love having lots of washi tape. Don't spend all the money. Don't get yourself into my situation where I've got a box of washi tape that I could put both of my cats in and still it would weigh less than how much washi tape I have to get rid of. Buy a couple of rolls in colors that you really like. Start there. See how often you use it. That's where I'm going to leave that. You could watch that live stream. Can't even talk that much about it because, as some of you said in the comments, I need washi tape therapy. On to a couple of things that up until recently, well, I don't really still use one at all because I hate it, and the other one I hate but I'm using because I'm trying to save my tendonitis, and that's Stencils and Stamps. It is so easy to fall down the rabbit hole of either of them. So if you think stencils or stamps is something that you might get into, start small with something hella basic. I don't like using stamps. I really actually hate it, but I'm using them in my bullet journal this year because I really like having tiny habit tracker calendars. Drawing them in activates my tendonitis really badly. I am forcing myself to use stamps, even if it's just for a few things that drawing really doesn't work for me. So think about that. Think about like a couple of stamps or a couple of stamp sets that you think might actually really help you in your quest to do the bullet journal things. Same with stencils. There are some people who love the shit out of stencils, and there are some really nice ones that are made for people that bullet journal. Ones that give you different sizes of boxes, ones that measure for you grid spacing and all of these other things. The key is to think about what you really want to do after you've bullet journaled for a little while and look for a couple of stencils that suit that specific situation. I know I hate stencils. I only bust them out when I'm doing a fuckery plan with me where I'm trying to fuck my planner up because I hate them that much. My hand shakes. It's like the ruler making the janky lines except more intense. But if that's something that you want, do your research and don't buy all of the things. Are you noticing a theme here? Buying all of the things at once when you still don't know if you're going to use them or not is a surefire way to run out of money and have a whole shit ton of clutter that you're going to have to deal with later. Ask me how I know. Now, real quick, before I get to my final kind of topic that I'm going to talk about, which I feel very passionately about, I'm going to throw in here for embellishments, things like stickers, craft paper, you know, the little bits and pieces that you could use to add texture or layers or color to your bullet journal. I have a really good tip for you here. Use what you already have around the house to start with to decide whether it's right for you. Everybody gets like circulars in the mail that have different colors and things like that. Probably have some sort of colored paper somewhere in the house, construction paper or cardstock or something. If you've ever been a paper crafter, I guarantee you have a whole bunch of that shit somewhere. Paper bags make excellent craft paper sources. Tear and utilize embellishments and stickers from things that you already have to see again if that style works for you, especially when it comes to stuff that you have to buy in a large pack. Imagine deciding you want to use like a pink craft paper for 1 month in your bullet journal, but you have to order a 500 sheet ream of it. That's probably a bigger ream than it would be, but you get what I'm saying. You're going to wind up with a lot of stuff that you used for one project. Also, you can look at thrift stores, assuming that any of them are open right now in the pandemic, pandemic. You'll be surprised at the piles of craft supplies you find in thrift stores. You might be able to find bits and pieces that you could utilize in your journal for like a 1-month situation without accumulating a whole bunch of random shit. Just watch for people who donate massive bags of their random shit and then they just try to sell it as one like mass. You might find yourself with a humongous hoard of garbo that you didn't even realize you brought into the house because it only cost $5. Just because it's cheap doesn't mean you need it. And now that I've talked about those things, I want to bring up kind of the final countdown for me. This is an area that I have a very specific feeling about, and that's paint. There's watercolor paints, there's acrylic paints, there's gouache. I don't think anybody uses oil paints in their bullet journal because they take forever to dry. There's also inks and sprays and things like that, but we'll just look at paints for this moment. Now here's the thing. I love to watercolor paint. I have a ridiculous amount of watercolor paints, excellent just regular paints, and also I have not only the gold fine tech that you're used to seeing in some people's videos, the really beautiful gold shimmery paints, I have multiple shimmery paint palettes as well. I don't use any of them in my bullet journal. I don't have any problem doodling in my bullet journal, but for some reason the idea of painting either on a paper and taping it into my bullet journal or painting directly into my bullet journal really doesn't appeal to me. Don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you not to paint in your bullet journal. Like, fucking go for it if you are. I feel like even though I don't paint in my bullet journal, I have some leg to stand on when it comes to advising people on purchasing paints, because I have a lot of experience with different paints, mostly watercolors. I'm not really great at advising on acrylics or gouache. I'm only dabbling in gouache, and I just use the cheap craft paints for when I acrylic paint with mixed media. I feel like I have enough experience with watercolors to give you a little bit of advice, and that is, again, don't buy all of the things at once. You may not even like it, but if you do, it can be really easy to start hoarding the fuck out of watercolors. Ask me how I know. My suggestion would be to get a good basics palette and practice color mixing. If you can learn color mixing, even if you get a bigger palette with more colors, you'll be able to do more with it if you start to understand how colors work. And the best way to understand how colors work is to experiment with them. One of my favorite recommendations for people if they're starting with a basic palette is Prima Marketing. I think they have a different name now, Art Philosophy Co. Basics palette, you know, it's got the basic rainbow, bunch of colors. It's a good palette to work with. If you don't have a lot of money to spend, you really want to try watercoloring, skip the crappy like chalky watercolors you can get from Michael's and get the prong watercolors. They are semi-moist. They're semi-moist, but they have a lot of pigment and they work really well for something that is so inexpensive. As for shimmers, if you think you're going to use them, you cannot go wrong with the Fine Tech Gold palette. They are outstanding. The key with those is to put water on them, because if you just go into them like dry with like a wet brush, they're not going to have any amount of the vibrance that you want. They need to soak for a little bit before they work really well. But if you want more color with shimmers than just golds, the Paul Rubens shimmer palette is fantastic, and it has a ton of really cool colors in it, and they work pretty well. The Paul Rubens regular palette is also really nice too, but both of those are a little bit pricier. None of this is getting into the world of like Daniel Smith, like expensive watercolors. I'm not gonna even advise that. If you're not really used to watercolors, don't spend all the money on them yet. If you're gonna spend money on something, spend it on a nice brush. You cannot go wrong with getting a single round brush that's nice. A round brush can be used with the super fine tip point, or you can lay the belly of the brush down and make it nice and fat. It is very versatile. I have two favorite brushes that I like to work with that I could recommend. One is for people who are more focused on lettering with watercolors, and that is the Pigeon Letters round brush. They are synthetic and they have a lot of snap to them. They work really nice for lettering. And if you are not lettering and you want a brush that holds a little bit more water, then the Princeton Neptune Synthetic series. They're not cheap, but they are more affordable than a natural hair brush. Either of those, I would go with a size 6 or a size 4 round to have for working in a bullet journal. If you're going to work bigger than that, maybe go with an 8. I've given you a bunch of advice on things you could buy for your bullet journal, but really what I'm telling you here is to go slow, to not buy all of the things, to try things slowly. I talked about this in my previous video about my streamlined bullet journal system. Don't just try something once and decide you want to get all of the things. Use it for a little while before you decide if you want to upgrade or buy more of it. Otherwise, you're going to just be spending hella money, even if you've got the money to spend. Do you want to spend all of your money blindly, or do you want to actually think about it and maybe save some money? If you buy a whole bunch of cheap shit, but you hate most of it, then you're going to have spent a bunch of money on a whole bunch of cheap shit and have a bunch of shit you got to get rid of. Whereas if you spend a little bit at a time, you might be able to spend a little bit more money on better stuff down the line. So yeah, go slow and don't buy all the things because you don't need them all at once. However, have as much fun as you can when you're using them, because you never know when or how this hobby of journaling is going to help you maybe get inspired to pick up a new hobby like watercoloring or brush lettering. I'm not telling you to not have fun and to not be joyful. Just keep in mind that when you're spending your money, think about why you're spending it and what you're spending it on, rather than just doing it willy-nilly. Let's not willy-nilly all over this place. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below one of your favorite things that you're using right now in your planner or your bullet journal. Let's enable each other in the comments, but enable each other consciously. Yeah? Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, wash your hands, all the good things. Subscribe, and until next time, friends, peace.